You barely talk. That's the line. Some people hear it in almost every meeting, at every family dinner, on every first day at a new job. But here's what most people never understand. It was never that these people can't talk. It's that they don't want to talk in the wrong room. There's this common belief that quiet people are just always quiet. Psychology says that's not true at all. Most people who seem silent in one place can be someone completely different in another. They can be expressive, talkative, even loud, just not with everyone. Because talking isn't only about personality. It's about comfort, about trust, about whether there's a real connection with the person in front of you. One of the biggest reasons these people stay quiet is the energy of the room. When something feels off, forced conversations, fake energy, people trying way too hard to seem interesting, they naturally pull inward. They don't feel the need to match the tone of the place. They won't force themselves to fit in just to avoid standing out. Instead, they'd rather stay quiet and watch. Not because they're awkward, but because they're deeply aware of everything happening around them. Psychology explains this through something called the social filter. Some people automatically filter where they spend their words. Without even realizing it, they ask themselves, is it worth my energy here? Do I feel comfortable in this place? Are these people real? And if the answer is no, they hold back. But when they find the right people, everything changes completely. Around people they trust, they don't hold themselves in. They joke. They share opinions. They talk freely without weighing every word before it leaves their mouth. That's why you'll often hear something like, "You used to be so quiet, but now you talk so much." It's not inconsistency, it's context. The way they talk simply shifts depending on the space they're in and the people standing in front of them. Another key piece is what we call psychological safety. People open up when they feel safe. Safe from judgment, from rejection, from being misunderstood. If someone feels their words might get ignored, judged, or twisted, they'd rather stay silent. Not because they're weak, but because they're protecting themselves. They've learned that speaking without emotional safety can cost far more than silence ever would. Past experiences play a huge role too. Some people used to talk so much more, but over time they got interrupted, dismissed, or never taken seriously, and they learned to be far more careful with their words. They understood that not every space deserves their joy, so instead of forcing it, they just adjust it. They save it for the places where it'll actually be heard. That's not withdrawal, that's wisdom earned over time. The kind that only shows up after too many moments of feeling like opening your mouth changed absolutely nothing. There's also a strong link to energy awareness. People who talk little are usually very sensitive to how interactions affect them. They pick up fast when a conversation is draining, negative, or completely empty. So instead of joining in just for the sake of it, they conserve their energy. They'd rather stay quiet than feel hollow after a conversation that meant nothing. They've understood something most people still miss. Not every interaction adds to you. Some take from you. And once you learn to feel the difference, you get a lot more careful about where you spend your voice. Another deep reason is authenticity. They don't like pretending. They won't fake interest. They won't laugh just to be accepted. They won't act like a chatty person when they're not comfortable being one. If the connection isn't real, their silence just reflects that. And that's exactly why they get misread so often. People assume they're shy, that they're unfriendly, that they think they're better than everyone. But it was never about ego or fear. It's about alignment. They speak where they feel connected, and they pull back where they don't. For them, faking enthusiasm feels like a small betrayal of themselves, and they've decided they're not willing to pay that price just to fit in anymore. There's also the habit of observing before speaking. When they walk into a new environment, they don't jump straight into conversations. First, they watch. They notice how people talk to each other, how they treat each other, how they react. They're trying to understand the social dynamic before deciding how much of themselves to show. And that makes them far more intentional. They don't talk just to fill an awkward silence. They talk when their words actually mean something, or when they feel comfortable enough to be exactly who they are. Here's another important truth. They don't feel the need to be liked by everyone. They're okay being misunderstood by some. If that's the cost of staying real, they'd rather be completely themselves with a few people than reshape their whole personality to be accepted by many. To them, one deep conversation with a single person is worth more than 100 empty ones with strangers. They've learned that real connection isn't built on the number of words. It's built on the quality of the silence you can share. But this comes with a cost they rarely explain. Other people fill the gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions are almost always wrong. They get labeled without ever being understood. And instead of correcting everyone, they usually just let it go. They know that explaining yourself to someone who doesn't want to understand is wasting words where they already know they'll have no value. They'd rather save that energy for someone who's actually willing to listen with real attention. It's also important to understand that for them, silence isn't uncomfortable, it's normal. They don't feel pressure to keep a conversation alive every second. They're at ease with pauses. They're at ease with not talking, because they don't measure connection by how much is said, but by how real it feels. They can sit in silence with someone for hours and feel deeply accompanied, and they can talk to someone else for hours and feel completely alone. And here's something most people never notice. When a quiet person decides to speak, it almost always means something. They already thought about it. They already decided it was worth saying. That's why their words tend to carry so much more weight than the words of people who talk just to talk. When they say, "I'm not okay," they're really not okay. When they say, "You matter to me," they mean it. When they say, "I believe in you," they've thought about it. Their words aren't decorations. They're decisions. So when someone says, "You barely talk," what they're really seeing is just one side of that person. They're seeing them in a space where they don't feel fully comfortable, connected, or understood. Because the truth is simple. They're not quiet everywhere. They're only quiet where they don't feel like being themselves. Some people don't talk much, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that the wrong room can silence even the most expressive person in the world. And they've quietly decided they'd rather save their words for someone who knows how to listen than waste them on someone who just wants to fill the air with noise. If this reflection made you feel understood, subscribe to this channel for more videos exploring the psychology behind the human behaviors most people never stop to notice. Because understanding why someone stays silent often says far more about the room around them than about the person themselves.